Welcome to the Sabbath School Rescue Podcast with your host, Buster Swoopes and Michael Campbell. This week in preparation for Sabbath June 7th, we take a look at Lesson 10, Upon Whom the Ends Have Come. Together, let's take a gander at instances in the Bible where judgment is exacted.
The Sabbath School Rescue Podcast is hosted by Michael Campbell and Buster Swoopes at the Adventist Learning Community. Together, we love learning and have 18 years of pastoral experience, and now we have the privilege to dig deeper into the study.
All right, Michael, here we are, Lesson 10, Upon Whom the Ends Have Come. And our memory text is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 11 through 12. Now, all these things happen to them as examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Examples that are there for us, and Michael, I'm ready to jump into it. We chuckled a little bit at this first one, saying, "Hey, let's get our thinking caps and heart caps on." But the wrath of the Lamb, Sunday's lesson.
Yeah, so not like the happiest way to start a Sabbath school lesson, I guess, for this week.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give this up to the audience. We chuckled because you just think about the original imagery, the wrath of the Lamb, right? Like a lamb coming. It's not very scary, right? But at the same
Yeah.
time, we recognize who the Lamb represents. So, yes.
Yeah. So, and I think this is a part of it is that there is a reality to the whole great controversy narrative. We're talking Bible prophecy and symbolism and everything else that eventually, and the verse that it points us and takes us to right away is Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 17, the sixth seal. And of course there's an earthquake, and it's very dramatic. It's the end of the world, right? And in fact, at one point, the kings of the earth, they're crying out, all these people are crying out. They're trying to hide because of what's happening. Well, what's happening? It's the Lamb himself, Jesus, has returned. He's come, and they're crying out, to the rocks fall on us and everything else. And then here's this reference, which the lesson points us to. It says, who fall on us and hide from him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. And
Right.
so, yeah, that's like you said, Buster, it's this sort of bittersweet irony of all of this. Who's afraid? Like you said, who's afraid of a lamb? But here they are afraid, and the point being, is they know who's there. They know who this is, the Messiah, Jesus, now the returning King. And then finally it says at the end of this passage, for the great day of the wrath has come, and who can withstand it? And the wrath really isn't so much the Lamb himself, so much as all of these people here at the end of the world are the ones who've chosen to live apart and separate from the Lamb, to live separate from Jesus Christ himself. And we have here another passage from Matthew 24, verses 36 to 44, which is again this message of this reference to Noah. Really, again, what a compelling story. Now, recently, I took our Pathfinders. We all went up to the Sight and Sound. We saw the dramatic production. I don't know if you've seen that, Buster. Maybe some of our listeners have.
I've seen it on film, but I heard it's amazing in person.
Oh man, you got to go and see it sometime. When you have the chance, go see that in person. So by the way, that this is there's no affiliation with them. So it's not a commercial. It's just
we
to be a personal.
We don't get paid for it.
Yeah. But they really did a nice job, and our young people were really, just to walk through that story, the drama of how real that was and how dramatic that would have been for them. And Jesus talks about the end of the world here in this passage. It says that the day and the hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, but only the Father. And then it says, as it was in the days of Noah. So Noah kept preaching, and people were mocking and making fun of him. He's like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And like, yeah, right. We've never seen rain before. And then, of course, finally it happens. It happens too late. And I don't want to be a spoiler for any movies or in this case, Sight and Sound. But the way they do that is it just really comes home to really think, wow, how poignant and how challenging that must have been, because, Noah and his family certainly knew people that were on the outside, as they undoubtedly were banging on the ark when they realized their mistake too late. And so Jesus says, be ready, be aware and keep watch, he says, verse 42, because you don't know. You need to be ready, you need to be prepared. Not that you have to be afraid, but that God is merciful and he gives ample opportunity. But eventually there will come a threshold where it's beyond which it's too late. There is
Yes.
no more, you know. So, yeah, so the wrath of the lamb, ironically, which brings us to, how did Noah share the message that he had? How did he do evangelism, Buster?
Yeah. So, Michael, thank you so much for reading Matthew 24:36 through 44. Our Monday's lesson picks up a portion of that same passage, which is Matthew 24:37 through 39. And with the key passage portion of that passage being, but in the days of Noah were, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. And then our lesson is asking us to compare the moral conditions of today versus the moral conditions of Noah's time. And we're going to jump to Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. And I'm going to start at verse 3, actually. It says, and the Lord said, my spirit will not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And it talks about there's giants on the earth. But here it also says here in verse 6 that the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth and was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created on the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I've made them. And jumping up here as well, we see this. Now it came to pass, verse 1, man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the reason why I shared that, because there's two elements here, Michael and audience, and those two elements is there's a time element and then there's a moral element. And I really believe that this passage is talking about both, like as in the days of Noah, yes, times are getting evil and they're continuing to be evil, but we see that that has progressed throughout all of humanity since the beginning of the fall. And man has progressed every century, and every time that has lived has said this is the most evil time. And yet we can go back, and I hate to say the terminology that I know historians hate, history repeats itself, right? But we see elements of history repeating itself, and
Sure,
man has
sometimes it rhymes.
it exactly, sometimes it does. And but there's also this element of when the coming of the Son of Man comes, well, there's gonna be this element of people are just living their lives and it's gonna catch them off guard, right? So like a thief
Right.
in the night, they're gonna
Yeah.
say, "Oh yeah, 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 this has happened. This prophecy is being fulfilled. Yeah, who cares?" And then all of a sudden, when the flood came, they were warned, and yet no one believed. And as the days of Noah, when the flood came, no one was prepared because they didn't believe or heed the warning. And I believe the same thing is going to happen in our day. I'm baptizing a young man this Sabbath. My son is getting baptized this Sabbath, Michael, but I have Bible studies with another young man. And one of the reasons why he says he wants to get baptized, he says, man, I see prophecy being fulfilled. And I was able
Wow.
to talk to him in his life and actually help him alleviate some of that fear and showcase that around towards love of God and why perfect love casts out all fear, right? Because he was
Mm.
genuinely afraid, especially with things that are happening in the papacy. I won't go too deep into it, but a lot of Adventists are seeing prophecy being fulfilled, but it's not meant to drive us towards fear. It's meant to drive us towards our relationship with God. And so when I share that with you, I'm asking our audience to take that to heart and recognize that time is given to us. It's a gift, but tomorrow's not promised. So therefore, make the
Awesome.
most of today. Make the most of your relationship you have with God today. It's a
Love it.
really good, Michael, because I'm also having a couples therapy with a couple, and they've been going through the thick of it. And one of the things they're missing
Mm.
in their relationship is gratitude. They're both pointing fingers about you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And I
Ooh,
just asked them the question, how much time do you spend every day being grateful for the things that you do? Right.
wow.
And
Mhm.
they took time out for it and then came back the next week and they had smiles on their faces. They just said, we're so focused in on the 10% of the things that we're wanting to happen that we forgot about the 90% of the things that are happening.
Wow.
And I share that because in our lives, we can become so overwhelmed and
Mm.
so convoluted with all the things that are happening that we forget to be grateful for the things that are great. And
Yeah.
so take out time to practice that gratitude, focus in on the things that God is doing for you and not just the things like, well, I prayed for this and God didn't answer it. What about the 50 other things that he did grant you? And so be thankful and let's continue to move forward. And so that's Noah's evangelism as he preached. And it's very difficult because he preached for 120 years and he won his family. And sometimes that's what it takes. Nonetheless, let's be faithful as we share the gospel. So
Mm.
now, Michael, tell us about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Tuesday's lesson.
Yeah. Again, this kind of feels like a depressing lesson this week here.
It does.
The wrath of the Lamb. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah, the ancient cities, they get destroyed, but I think, it's these are references that are made in the New Testament by Jesus and others. I mean, it points out to Peter and Jude right away, a text that we'll turn to in just a moment. But, obviously the cities were destroyed for their corrupt and their evil, all of these things. And of course, we're reminded how there was an attempt to save them and everything else, but ultimately they are destroyed. They choose to cling to their sin, and there has to be a point upon which it goes. And we think of Noah, but now we're talking specifically about these two cities. Well, why were they destroyed? Right? Jude 5 talks about that says that they were given to sexual immorality and perversion, and that they serve as an example to those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. Well, we understand that as not meaning they're going to burn forever and ever for a finite amount of time, but that would be a finality that'd be an end. And that's certainly what we see with Sodom and Gomorrah. There was an end. The people in ancient Sodom and Gomorrah are still
Yes.
being punished, for whatever sexual immorality, but there was an end to those cities. There will be an end to sin on this earth, and that finality of it. And again, we see in Ezekiel 16, learn from your sister Sodom, the sister city, right? She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, unconcerned. They didn't help the poor and needy. They
Mm,
were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them, as you have seen. And I think this is a reminder. We sometimes focus on just a few things like the sexual immorality, but there's a whole ethos of turning away from God that was inherently selfish, and we can see that in the world today. We talk about how right before Christ comes. Well, I believe that time is now. We see a time in which people are arrogant and they have more than they need. They're overfed. They're unconcerned. They're not helping the poor and needy. If there ever was a time that God has called us as Christians to be followers of Scripture, we should be taking stock. Are we looking out for the people around us that are in the margins of society?
ouch.
I would, right now it doesn't seem to be as popular of a thing, but what about those immigrants, those people that are being deported? They're God's children too. And again, I'm not trying to get too far into the weeds into politics. I trying to avoid that. But I do think there is biblical principles that should inform our lives and our outlook and how we view the world around us. And so we should have compassion. Our first response to people around us isn't whether we're right or wrong in our political viewpoint. Should be, these are human beings made in the image of God, and whatever distress or a situation that they find themselves, we need to see them first as God's child. And so the poor and needy, let's not have a haughty spirit
Yeah.
where we become arrogant. I'm more privileged and therefore they don't deserve it or whatever. That should never be our response as Christians. That we're followers of Jesus Christ first before we're anything else. At least we should be. And that's what the story of Sodom and Gomorrah reminds us, how we situate ourselves, how we posture ourselves to those and the world around us. And that determines whether we're in Sodom and Gomorrah or whether we're opposed to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes.
So, which brings the question, I'm thankful that I'm not the judge. I need to worry about myself and not be pointing fingers, looking around, hey, but then ultimately there's someone else who's the judge of all the earth.
Yeah. Michael, one of the hardest things serving in Christianity, especially in the Adventist church, is melding minds or trying to shape minds and shaping our own minds and our hearts towards a biblical worldview. And it's so hard because we put our on this side of the world, we put our Western caps on and with our Western goggles, and we see Christ through our Western eyes. And oftentimes that's not how he's seen, and he's not even seen completely through the Jewish mindset either, although it's mainly written in the Jewish mindset, right? So it's important to understand the history and the culture and the background of understanding the concepts of why things were written the way they're written. But even in today's day and age, as we're looking at the judge of all the earth, we have to understand what's trying to be what the point is trying to be is shared here. And so Genesis 18 verses 17 through 32, it asks this question. It says, "What do we learn about the character of God and the way he ultimately plans to deal with evil on our planet from these verses?" And I won't read all of Genesis 18, 17 through 22 through 32, but this is Abraham interceding on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. His Now we have to remember his nephew Lot is living there, and Abraham was a man who had great empathy and compassion, but he's nowhere near as compassionate as God, right? So Abraham doesn't fully understand everything that's going on there. He doesn't understand the hearts and the minds of the people that are there in Sodom and Gomorrah, but yet we find Abraham, he's pleading. And verse 26, I'm going to start there. So the Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous in the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes." And then he goes in and says, "Suppose there are five less than 50 righteous. Would you destroy all the city for the lack of five?" He says, "Well, I find 45," and it keeps going down, and he's pleading with them. And verse 32, he finally says, then he said, "Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there." And he says, "I will not destroy it for the sake of 10." And so we see here
Mm.
it starts all the way up there and it goes all the way down to 10. And we understand what happens in the end. Sodom and Gomorrah is still destroyed. And someone might say, like, "Oh man, God is not a just God. He is so ruthless, and he is, and look at Abraham. Abraham just cares so much." We talked about the element of time, Michael, and
Mhm.
that element is, I think that the lesson that's trying to be given to us here is, I think of Joshua, "Choose you this day whom you'll serve, whether the gods of the Amorites on the other side of the river, or but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And now it's a day to make that decision, and we can't make that decision for others, and we have no idea. That's why I love what you shared there. We're not the judges. We
Mhm.
can't judge. We can't. We don't have the ability to know the hearts and minds of people, but God does, and so therefore we trust him.
Yeah.
But we're called on this earth to be compassionate and to look at those who are being deported, as you said earlier, Michael, and to not look upon them as our enemies or as people that are taking our resources. And I'm speaking here from, once again, the biblical worldview, the strangers that's within thy gates, right? We even see the biblical stance of the seventh year. You're supposed to leave the extra crops on the land for
Yeah.
those who are homeless and destitute to come and take of the land. We don't have those aspects anymore. Now it's every man for himself, and it's not supposed to be. We're supposed to look out, especially for the orphans and the widows, and to be able to place ourselves in other people's shoes and not say, "Because I was born here and doing this and doing that, therefore I'm better than you." The biblical worldview is that we are equal, and that doesn't matter if you think you're above me, if you think you're below me. No, and we are equal. And the same blood of Christ that is available to save me is available to save you. And so
Mm.
therefore, I'm asking the audience to, once again, don't take this politically, but take this spiritually, of asking God, what is it that you want me to transform into and be? How do you want me to see the world? How do you want me to see others? How do you want me to view myself? And how do you want me to view you? And with that being said, as we looked at the judge of all the earth, we're also looking at the pre-Advent judgment. Michael, take us to Thursday's lesson.
Yeah, so this kind of brings us full circle and in our Adventist understanding of kind of cosmic conflict and what's happening. We do believe that there is, if we believe Jesus is coming, we believe that this is the time of preparation and so we think of how do we understand that, right? And so our pioneers, as they wrestled with this and our beginnings of our church, were just naturally drawn as they studied the Bible to Daniel chapter 7. And we see a lot of different imagery here that we're familiar with. We've already covered some of it earlier in the Sabbath School Quarterly, but we're coming back to it again. And this is the throne room of God, right? That's what verses 9 and 10 are talking about. And then in verse 13, he sees one like the Son of Man. Well, who is this? Approaches the Ancient of Days. He's realizing he's in the midst of the sanctuary in heaven, or the throne room of God in heaven, which is really what the sanctuary is, right? This is the presence. This is where God himself dwells. And of course, verse 14, very, magisterial here. It says all authority and glory and sovereign power, all nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. So this is the epicenter of everything here.
Indeed.
And then it describes for us what's actually going on here in verse 22. It says Ancient of Days comes, right, in favor of the holy people of the Most High. So he's obviously, this is God himself. This is Jesus, as our high priest, engaging or interacting with his people. And then kind of explains in more detail verses 26 and 27, a court will sit. So this is where we get the idea of a judgment, right? We're thinking of this in terms of a legal kind of framework here. And ultimately, the outcome of that is what is determined. We see the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. In other words, finally, God's going to rule and say, hey, here's my people, and this is the end of the world. But that framework of that sanctuary in heaven, of that throne room of God, there's something special going on. And that's that preparation work. And when I was a young person, I used to think, Buster, that, oh man, if I could just be perfect enough, then Christ could come. And so I was constantly obsessed and worried about myself. And then I missed the point of this whole biblical passage here in Daniel chapter 7, is that the focus isn't on me. The focus is on Christ. Christ is the one that's perfect enough. And during this preparatory time, there is investigative judgment, because that's a time of
Yes.
preparation where God's people surrender themselves more and more fully to him. And that's a beautiful thing, as they behold Christ and become more like him. And that's the beauty of the pre-advent message, is God's the one. Jesus himself is the only one that's truly perfect. And yet he does that good work in our hearts each and every day, as once again, as I said, as we surrender ourselves to him. And so, Jesus is not only the judge, but he's also our advocate. He's our trial lawyer, we would say,
He
working
is.
on our behalf, trying not to keep us out of heaven, but to get us in. And that's what that message is. Just like Noah, he's trying to, hey, come on into the ark, come on in. Come and be saved. That pre-advent message is just the same thing. It's a preparatory message saying, hey, this now is the day of salvation. Pay attention, wake up, and God wants nothing more than our full attention.
Yeah. Michael, I love that. And hopefully we pay attention to it, and we have no idea how exactly it's going to turn out. But once again, may we choose the Lamb and follow him wherever he goes.
Yeah, until whom the ends of the world have come. And there will be
Exactly.
an end. But it's good news. It's good news because Jesus is there with us all the way through to the end. So, well, we've
Amen.
been taking a deeper dive into the Sabbath School lesson each week. And so we want to thank you for listening to the Sabbath School Rescue podcast, and invite you to join us back again next week as we take a deeper dive into scripture. Until then, we're your hosts, Soup
And Swoopes,
and we're signing out. As we wrap up, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, the Adventist Learning Community, a ministry of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists.
You can join us each week by subscribing on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Also, make sure you share it with as many people as possible. And be sure to give us feedback by rating our podcast, and go to our website, sabbathschoolrescue.org, for each weekly episode.